this sort of work before, or knows anything about foresight or futures, or come across it in their work. It might be interesting to know if anyone's come across this before. So as I say, my name's Neil. That's what I look like in my other real life, not virtual remote home working life. And as I said, we're at Nile, we're a strategic design company, very multidisciplinary. We work in the fields of service design, UX, and we talk about strategic design. And what we mean by that is connecting the big picture strategy of an organization to the things that teams need to do on the ground to deliver against that strategy. So it's connecting the two together. So if you think about perhaps a journey, a digital journey that you need to create for your customers, or a new product or proposition you're trying to create for your customers, we would be the ones that would help understand what those customers' needs are, and how that fits in with a bigger picture, the strategic picture of that organization. That's what we mean by strategic design. But when we talk about design, we're thinking about services, products, propositions, and digital experience, so UX, that kind of thing. We've been around a long time. We've been around since 2006, and our heritage is very much in human factors and the human side of making products and services work for people. So let's get into the topic of futures and foresight then. So the very first thing they teach you at foresight school or future school is it's not about making predictions, and I'm going to explain why that's important in a moment. It's very important to stress that this really isn't about getting the future right. It's almost impossible to do that, as we've just pretty much experienced. And then the follow-on point from that is, and when you see this, it's like the answer to a quiz question. Once you see it, it's obvious, but until that point, you maybe don't realize the future. There is no preordained future. Of course, there are things that are fairly certain. So if I don't know, if it's cloudy, very cloudy, and looks like it might rain, well, there's a good chance that could happen. But when we're talking about systemic change on a grand scale, it's very much more difficult to predict. And there is no idea of one preordained future. In fact, there are many futures, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So we're not going to talk about prediction, but we are going to talk about what weird and wonderful things might be signaling what's to come next. And this is one of the sort of fundamental principles of thinking about the future, as this idea of spotting signals. So this one cropped up on my feed not so long ago. And typically we're looking for things that perhaps surprise us and make us kind of laugh or shock us slightly, or make us think, is that really happening? Those are the things we should perhaps have our radar tuned into. So if you can't predict the future, it does beg the question, well, why should you bother doing it at all? What's the point of doing that if there's no kind of concrete answer at the end? And this is the way that I like to think about this. Now, this quote is from the executive director of Institute for the Future in Silicon Valley, who we partner with around this topic. And she actually said this ironically before the pandemic, but the sort of the analogy is sort of perhaps a bit more powerful now that we've been living through this. So the idea is that in the medical field, inoculating yourself prevents you from falling ill. In futures thinking, if you've considered a whole range of possibilities, you're kind of inoculating yourself. In other words, you're preparing yourself for what might come next. And even if that thing doesn't happen the way exactly you think it might, you've gone through the process of putting yourself in that future. And it just helps you be more prepared for that thing happening. So, and then the other thing to say about this, so it's very much about being prepared about what might come next. The other thing that it's worth saying is it's about embracing things that we probably don't like the sound of, or we might actively want to avoid. I think when it comes to business and design and these types of things, we're very much being optimistic. We're wanting to pursue the things that bring about good outcomes. And the thing about this idea of foresight is we're also embracing the things that perhaps are less pleasant or a bit more uncomfortable, and that takes practice and can feel difficult because you're challenging your cherished beliefs. You know, if you're having a discussion about perhaps it's, I don't know, your entire business model might be disrupted, that's quite an uncomfortable idea. So the idea of this process is it's starting to chip away at some of those things. And then the follow-on point from that is, this is really about pursuing the future that you want to create. So the idea that you have some agency in creating the future that you want to bring about. This isn't something that happens outside of us, that we have no influence over. Well, some things are that way, but we want to maintain some element of control. So in spite of this change that we might be having to live through, what could we be doing that would bring about a more positive future that we want to bring about? So just a few definitions then. So foresight, the strategic foresight that I talked about, it's really about a structured way to think about the future. That's the value of this. It gives you some sort of a framework to navigate that uncertainty, and that is hugely valuable. We're often talking to designers and design teams, but for you guys, the same thing goes here. It's really about what are the fundamental things that you could start to do tomorrow or today that would help you think about the future in a different way. It's worth saying that certainly my experience of going through this type of work is really challenging. It can be very, very challenging. There's a new set of language that you need to understand. These terms that I'm throwing at you, a lot of them will be new. There's a whole kind of academic backdrop to this field that you know, there's a lot of people that have spent their whole careers working on the idea of the future, so that can be overwhelming. So it's worth remembering that we're just trying to make those first sort of steps towards that. The other thing to say is it's an imperfect process. You don't get a sense of satisfaction from from doing this type of thing. You find like that there are always stones that you've left unturned and more things you could explore. But the fact that you're putting some time into the thinking about the future is better than none. You definitely get out what you put in. So if you set time aside in your teams to think about the future, or even just to discuss it and the different ways it could play out, you'll get the return from that. Certainly demands a lot of your time. It can demand a lot of your time, so it can be tough alongside the day job. Stakeholders like the idea of, oh, let's think about the future. That sounds like something that's very important, but the committing to that is difficult because it's uncertain. And as humans, we like to be certain about things. We want concrete, actionable, evidence-based action. Often with the foresight work, you don't always get that, so that can be hard to commit to. You've got to build relationships outside your bubble. So this isn't something that you can do behind your desk. You have to engage with others outside of your team. Seeking out experts in other fields is really key. And you get, as I said, you get a lot of value out of this collective interaction as a team that you're going through this. So I've spelled out a lot of the challenges with thinking about the future, and the idea of today is really just to lower the barrier and talk about 4 simple habits that we adopt at Nile that you can start to use that help you think about the future. And even if you start with habit 1 and don't go any further, that is a great start, and I would encourage you to do that. But I'm going to go through these 4 buckets of habits that you can start to do. Why should you do that, or what's the benefit of doing that? I won't go through each of these one by one, but the one that I found that's hugely valuable is that collective understanding and journey that you go on as a group is hugely valuable. If you don't ever have that conversation about the different ways the future can play out, then you do miss out. So that is kind of the fundamental benefit of doing this. So let's get into it then. Let's talk about these 4 habits, and we'll do a bit of interaction with some of these as well. So the first one is scan the horizon, and this is probably something that you may already be doing. Many of you have probably read trends reports, that kind of thing. The fundamental idea is that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed, a famous quote from William Gibson, sci-fi author. So the idea is that you should be scanning the horizon across many, many categories to spot early signs of change. So what things are standing out that could potentially scale and develop a different future. So it's this idea of sensing change early, basically. So that example I gave you earlier was a great example of a signal of change. So when we talk about signals of change, we're talking about a real example of this local disruption with the potential to scale. So this is something that's perhaps small scale. It might only be in your city, or it might only be a certain group of people that are exhibiting this particular behavior, or it's a very, I don't know, early stage product like this. And your job as a futurist is to say, well, why is this interesting? What's the so what from spotting this thing? So this example here is about this new sort of breed of clothing that people are wearing when they travel. And the so what here could be, well, what does that mean for other types of fashion or for other categories? What about sportswear when you're social distancing in the gym? What could happen there? I've talked about social distancing, black tie, and I'm being provocative here. Will there be stigmas around fashion that people wear, the clothing that people wear? There's certainly stigmas around wearing face masks. So if you're in that consumer fashion space, this would be something that you might pick up on very early. So this is how we like to think about signals. You want the what, the so what, and then the source. Like, where did you find this? And this is really your data in the present that helps you think about what the future could be like, how the future could be different. Worth saying that signals aren't trends. So a trend is a more sustained change over time that has its own momentum and direction to it, and is a much easier, in some ways, a bit of a safer bet, because you can see the trajectory. With signals of change or signals, they tend to be much more sporadic, and it's hard to put your finger on. Is that a trend? Is that really something that has its own momentum yet? And if it hasn't got that, then you really are looking at something that's very early, and that's what you're kind of after. Let's have a look at some examples of signals of change that we've been looking at, or we identified through the pandemic, and why they're interesting. The first one, so this person here decided to close their company for an entire week because of the pandemic, and it wasn't for the reasons that you might think. So in this example, it was about protecting the mental health and well-being of his employees, rather than, I don't know, a downturn in client work or any other reason. So the so what there is about this idea of radical new ways to structure work and life to protect our health. So if you said, what if this were to scale? What does this tell us about the future? Well, there's something interesting about the impact that this situation is having on our mental health and our well-being that we should pay attention to. What could that mean for organizations in a bigger way? The second one in the middle there was, as we've become more familiar with using Zoom like we're doing today, people are subverting the use of video interactions in different ways. And this example is of a kid sharing a way to be virtually present in the room and look like you're in the classroom when you're actually not. You're kind of skiving off and doing something else. And why that is interesting is it really tells us that the idea of being present virtually is something that will change radically in the next 5-10 years. So what could be, well, will this become so commonplace that faith in the authenticity of virtual interactions is undermined? How do you make sure that that who you're speaking to is actually who you're speaking to? And then maybe a more positive view of that is, how do you, we were talking about backdrops. Backdrops is a fairly common thing we've been using in Zoom. What happens if you fast forward that 5 years? How will we start to curate our digital persona in the workplace to present a certain image to others, to demonstrate our credibility, to feel good about ourselves? That kind of thing is a really interesting but subtle thing that we spotted. The final one is kind of a bit more out there, if you like. So this idea of people inviting a llama or a goat to your next corporate Zoom meeting for $100. That sounds very kind of flippant. What's the so what there? What does that tell us about the future? Well, as we're starting to break all of the kind of rules around how we interact with each other through work, there are going to be unmet needs that we run into that we haven't thought about before. And one of those is, who wants to be on a Zoom call constantly, all day, every day, back to back? It's really draining. It's really tough. And this is a very kind of, I suppose, playful way to bring some levity to that story. So that tells us that the way that we set things up right now in terms of our workday and how that will operate, there are signs here that that's not sustainable, that there's got to be more to it than that. So that's just some examples of signals of change that we've picked up. So let's talk about, well, what does that habit look like in your organization? What we're talking about is, this is a daily habit. You know, you should be monitoring your social networks, your news feeds, definitely going beyond your perhaps your geography. This is something that I definitely had to try hard to avoid, is constantly just reading UK news all the time. You know, look outside of your borders, in particular towards China. And the idea is that you're trying to spread scan the horizon very widely. I'm not going to get too deep into this idea of the STEEP framework. Some of you may have heard of this before. It stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, and political. And that just gives you some categories of the types of topics you should be thinking about. Very often in my field of work, we're obsessed with technology and technology innovation because it's exciting and interesting. And we tend to forget the more boring stuff, which could be policy change or regulation, which has a massive effect on the future. So yeah, spread the net wide. But essentially, takeaway is, every day you should be monitoring your feeds for those really kind of surprising left field changes that you're starting to spot, and then opening up that dialogue with your team. And this is something that gets easier the more you do it. So I'm just going to open this up. Such a small group. We're just going to open this up to the group, actually. We don't need to follow the instructions here. There's more for a bigger group. But I'm curious about some of the signals of change that you guys have seen recently. What things have you spotted that perhaps have surprised you perhaps in your line of work, or even from a personal level, the way that you've seen, I don't know, friends and family interact with each other, or I don't know, it could have been a response to a particular situation. Has anyone got any examples of something that they've seen? I'll maybe give you like a minute or two to think about that. That sound all right, Kira?
Yep, that's fine. So if you want to speak, you can unmute yourself, or I can do it from here. It's up to you guys.
And I'll just put that example up on the screen again.
And we can also open for discussion if you want that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Anything around anything I've just presented. So
something I noticed actually on your picture about obviously the face mask is that a lot of the fashion brands have already cashed in on this, haven't they? Have you noticed, like Jules and Gap already bringing out a whole line of different face masks, and a lot of brands are starting to do it.
Yeah.
I think obviously during the summer when we were all in lockdown, that there was a lot of obviously promotional branded, probably unlicensed logos going on face masks and etc. So a lot of that has already obviously gone past the future, now present, and obviously probably into the past as well. So as you say, they're now looking for the next thing. You know, what is it going to be, like branded non-contact gloves or something like that, or such like.
That's a really good point. In fact, the first time I gave this presentation, the first time maybe 6 weeks ago or so, or maybe 8 weeks. And it's just so, like, some of the stuff that we've been looking at saying, yeah, this could change really quickly. It's really so shocking how fast it's moved on. So I think it's a really good point. In fact, this example here isn't so surprising anymore, perhaps, to your point.
I think, I mean, something I just think about is as you're sitting here saying, what products could we offer, you know, for the Zoom meetings, etc. And I've seen these, or I've been part of obviously other meetings, Zoom meetings, where they have this auto background, what sort of, I think it's a digital thing, it just sort of cuts out your image and plants you in front of a background. But obviously not always like basically really cut in. So sometimes you get your ear cut off or something like that because it's an automatic generated thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for us as a printer, we could supply like backdrops, etc. Something to like what the Norwegian-British thing is. I don't know if that's digital or whether you're sitting in front of a some kind of graphic. But that's the sort of thing, yeah, we could get into more, which we already do. But something we could promote more. It's some kind of like visual facility, like behind me, my home office, or you know, have some kind of pull-up banner, extra wide pull-up banner as a backdrop. Which again, you could advertise things on, like you know, the product you sell or the branding.
Yeah. Anyone else got any thoughts on signals?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought of was that us as Nordic Chambers of Commerce with Kura and Norwegian Chamber as well, of course, we used to have a monthly Nordic drinks networking event. And because we couldn't organize that, there was several different things that was replacing the networking event. For example, virtual beer tasting or virtual whiskey tasting, Nordic quiz. And I think like that's already something that has kind of changed, and we could also have it in the future even when we're allowed to organize like live events in a physical venue.
Yep. If you look at the, I mean, what this does as well is it puts a fire under the development of technology. If you think about how quickly Zoom had to respond to some of the security issues they had, if you fast forward 5 years, how much more advanced and refined will this technology be that allows us to be virtually present in different ways with each other? So, you know, some of the work we've been doing, we've been looking at how a group physically could be together and have others in the room. At the moment, it's a screen on a wall, isn't it? Where you have and that's pretty clunky. But if you look at what's going on with Apple Glass and some of the roadmaps of the big tech companies around eyewear and augmented reality and that kind of thing, the way we will be digitally present with each other will change in radical ways, I think, because of the need to continually to be managing this situation. Any other thoughts from the group before we move on? Any questions or?
I was just thinking about more from a social angle, really. But during, and I guess it has a drinks theme as well. But during lockdown, we were led to believe that the alcohol sales have reduced, in fact, halved over the lockdown period. Yeah. And really, whether that is maybe individuals were taking more of a consideration about their health and what sort of lasting effect that is maybe going to have for the hospitality sector outside of you know, the restrictions that we have in place already. When things get back to normal, are the pubs and restaurants still going to be, you know, earning as much as they were before from alcohol? It's going to have a defined effect for the foreseeable future. Yeah,
that's a really good one. I mean, we're starting to enter into this synthetic decade, as it's called. As I'll share some of the sources that we use at Nile for tracking trends and keeping on top of these things. But this idea of, you know, we already think about synthetic meat. I forget the name of the meat brand, actually, certainly the UK, that's been very sort of popular. If you think about the shift towards more healthy, you know, staying safe and focus on health and synthetic food and synthetic drinks. We were looking at one of our clients is in the luxury spirit space. There's quite a lot happening in that space around molecular whiskey and things like that. It's not that surprising to think that there would be you know, and there are already drinks that are enjoyable, but and maybe synthetic, but are not as harmful, perhaps. So I think you know, we'll start to see changes there. There's a lot going on in the food sector at the moment. Not only because of the you know, some of the stuff that's happening in the States at the moment with the wildfires and the impact on the environment. That is also going to be a big driver around what we consume and how it's made. So I think you're right. I think all of that, it's trying to tie these things together is the other thing. You'll start, as you start to do this, you'll start to think about how all these different signals could weave together rather than being a standalone thing. So your idea about more healthy habits and mindset, how does that play into environment? How does that play into the economy and uncertainty around work and what people spend their money on? You'll start to see these patterns emerging, and that's one of the kind of skills you need to kind of adopt. Cool, thank you very much for that. We can do some more of that a bit later. I won't go through all of these in detail, just some examples of where you can find signals and how we do it at Nile. So many of you probably use Slack or have seen it at least as part of your work. We have a Slack channel for signals that we keep running in the background, and that's part of our daily habit. That's how we open it up to everybody, and we try to have a bit of debate around these different things that we're seeing. Some other examples of where to find signals. Again, to be honest, a lot of it is about having your radar switched on, and you'll find that when you have that on, you'll spot these things all the time. So radio phone-ins, if you're listening to the radio, news feeds, obviously, we talked about. Again, South China Morning Post is a great one for getting outside of our kind of, I suppose, European worldview of things. Academic journals and papers is a good place to go. What was the other one I was going to suggest? Patents. If you have the inclination, you can search for patents that have been applied for. Certainly for the big tech companies. And there are websites that curate those things as well. So once you know what field or topic you're interested in, the future of X, whatever X is for you guys, that helps you narrow down the search. But here are some simple things that you can start with. But it's about having that radar turned on for signals of change and challenging yourself, you know, looking for the unexpected. So let's talk about the second habit. So this is about challenging the status quo. So, you know, scanning for signals is great, but you need to start to pull them together in a way that helps you understand how the future could change. And let's talk a bit about that. So key concept of foresight is this idea of multiple futures. So there's not just one preordained path from A to B. And that's normally how we tend to think, actually, as humans. We think the future is a natural consequence of the present, which it is, but it's not a straight line, essentially. So this is a very, I won't go into this too much depth, but the idea that there are futures that feel quite probable, and then beyond that, there are some that are plausible, they make sense, but they perhaps feel a little bit more challenging. And then the possible futures are, you know, that's when you get into sci-fi, time travel, things like that. It's possible, but is it something that will happen? It's fairly unlikely. But that just gives you an idea. The takeaway here is, you know, that there isn't just one way the future can play out. There's more than one way, and the idea is you should be open to that. So when we talk about habits, this is something that we encourage you to do maybe monthly as a group, and start to discuss the signals you've been seeing, and then ask the question, what if, and if this, then what happens? So as that discussion that we just had around healthy habits and the things we're seeing in the present, you know, what are the consequences or the ripple effects of that playing out more broadly, and how does it play into the other things that we're starting to see in the world? And this idea of desirable and undesirable outcomes, what are some positive ways it could play out, what are some negative ways? So let me just give you an example. So on the left, if we think about remote working for a minute, the implications of a sustained shift in remote working. So the default thinking tends to be, or around this topic would be, you know, most patterns return to normal, but there's a bit more remote working than before. And I'm being a bit facetious here, but that's kind of the standard, I suppose, way you might think about this. With a more transformative view of the future, and you start to build a bit of richness to get into that, and perhaps use some of these signals. Could it look a bit like this? So massive leaps in remote collaboration technology means working remotely not only sticks permanently, but it's completely transformed. So this future is about a huge kind of surge in the innovation and growth of technology that makes remote collaboration happen. And I talked earlier about Apple Glass and augmented reality, but if you dial that up, what does that start to look like? And then the second part of this, we overhaul our homes with Zoom and IKEA multimodal living innovations. So maybe there's a partnership between some of these collaboration software companies and IKEA, and what you put in your home to make this kind of more flexible living space work properly. And maybe we start to curate our own digital professional personas in new ways. And I talked about that kid hacking his class Zoom feed so it looks like he's working. Maybe there's a whole kind of shift towards people curating their persona in the same way that you see on things like TikTok and other social platforms. What happens when that bleeds into the workplace? So that's just one way we can think about the future. And if I'm in the business of, I don't know, if I'm running a company and I have a team, what could this mean for my team? If I'm in the, I don't know, real estate business, what could that mean for me? It just gives me something more concrete to work from. Or there's an alternative. I've called this a reversal future. So there's a couple of other signals in here. So remote workers around the world are renting hotel rooms from 9 to 5 to get work-life balance back again. So there's a bit of a backlash against, as I said before, this constantly on Zoom thing, which we've all experienced. And then we've got, which isn't surprising, a quarter of bank branches will close in the coming 3 years. And there's similar, challenges around commercial property generally, although there are nuances within that and in terms of like leases and how long they last and so on. But the idea of physical space, certainly in cities, is the way it works now is under threat. So what about a different type of future? So a backlash against unhealthy home working habits, along with a successful vaccine program in early 2021, creates a new breed of multi-purpose community spaces centered around local, non-urban areas, taking advantage of empty commercial real estate. Only the most vulnerable work from home full time. So this is an alternative future that we've explored here that says, well, what if it doesn't play out the way we thought it would? What if people actually rebel against this whole kind of remote working thing entirely, and it becomes something different again? And that is quite a valid, way to think about that. And then you've got to ask, what's the implication of that? And we'll get onto that in a minute. I'm going to touch on this very briefly, just so that you know it's out there. But this is, I suppose, a more advanced kind of topic that you get into, the different ways that you can think about futures, the different archetypes of future that you can have. So you can think of the future playing out in kind of different types of categories. So you've got like a baseline future, which is kind of a bit more of what we've got already. A collapse future is a more catastrophic view of what might happen. A transformation one that I just mentioned before. So that's a useful kind of, I suppose, starting point if you wanted to have a session with your team and say, hey, we've spotted this healthy eating thing, and here are some different ways we think that could play out. Which ones do we want to pay attention to? This is a useful framework for thinking about that. So just something to be aware of, could be useful for some of you. I'm going to touch on this in terms of the actual practical side of doing this. A useful tool that if you get really into this, you can start to use. It's called Futures Wheel, and it's really simple, and it just helps us understand the ripple effects of change in a more structured way. I can send this presentation around afterwards. There's a link to a Medium article that explains it in more detail. The way it works is you start in the middle with a shift that you're seeing, or a change that you're seeing, and this could be anything. It could be an increase in, taxation, or it could be perhaps something you've seen in the news about the way people are traveling, or I don't know, whatever that might be, and you want to think through as a group what could happen, or what could the implications be of that for us. And what you're trying to do here is think through the first, second, and third order consequences. So let me just give you an example of what I mean. So in the middle there, we've got this shift, of massive sustained shift in working from home. And if we look to the right-hand side there, what are the first obvious implications of that? Well, offices are left empty for extended periods. Well, what's the implication of empty offices? Well, commercial real estate could be completely repurposed. Well, what's the implication of that? Well, maybe there's more housing space available. Maybe there's a surge in an opportunity in design, because people that work in interior design or architecture are going to have to reshape these physical spaces entirely. Maybe there's going to be a growth in refit and refurb areas of business because of that. So it's a very simple concept, but it's a very, very useful way to think about the future. And you could do this on a bit of paper, 10 minutes. You could just jot down that thing that you've seen, maybe that signal of change or that shift, and just spend 5-10 minutes just jotting down these implications. And you'll be surprised at the things you end up with that are very different to perhaps your gut instinct, or what you would have otherwise thought of. We were going to have a practice of this, but I think given the time, we'll probably just move on. But I might just open it up for questions at that point. Does anyone have any comments or thoughts on that second step that I've just talked about?
Anyone? You can just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just wondering, for us, just thinking about this, obviously at the moment, for me, it's ideally to try and get in front of people and sell and show them products we produce, which is a very tactile product. Obviously do that by remote is obviously very hard as well. But I think that maybe we need more focus on our website. I know we need doing anyway, but maybe a more digital solution, an online price, I mean, there's a ton like Mr. Prince and people like that, and Solo Press, who will give you a catch-all scenario, but it doesn't give you the bespokeness of what we offer. So it's something we need to try and come up with, maybe to have more of a digital presence.
Yep. Yeah, well, you could certainly, you could use this sort of thing to think about, what about a big shift in, I don't know, showing our wares digitally? Like, what are the implications of that? What are the different implications of that? How could that play out? What do we need to be ready for? So I don't know, maybe it's about your competition, maybe it's about your customers and what they're receptive to, and what behaviors will change because of that. If you went through this tool for a bit, I think you'd probably stumble into things you perhaps wouldn't otherwise have thought of. So I definitely encourage you to try that out. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's definitely a factor.
It certainly gets you thinking about the scenarios. Yeah, it's something that has sort of sparked a grey cell in my head, of maybe start doing more of. Because obviously we were very focused on meeting people face to face, and obviously then selling our wares and showing it to people that you can see. Yes, we can send stuff in the post to them, but obviously when you start talking about print, outside of the standard business cards, it's so bespoke that a conversation, ideally face to face, can drive other scenarios and solutions. Yeah,
maybe it's the starting point for you is perhaps a bit of research on what are the big shifts happening in your space, and what ones could you then start to use to think through some different ways it could play out, and perhaps then you can say, well, maybe we should go in this direction.
Yeah.
We've spotted a different opportunity.
Well, we looked at that in some respect, because obviously the big shift you'll see online, there's loads of trade printers who are just doing, drop-down menus or click and I want 50, 100, and it's all standardized items. There's no one really doing any bespokeness as such. You lose that option of coming up with your own sizes and shapes and things like this, because everyone wants to do A5, A4, A3, because it's so, it's just easy. Yeah. someone needs to come up more, allowing more solutions. One of our bonuses has always been, because we're quite central London based, we're able to do things quite quickly, same day turnaround in some respects, where if you go on to these Mr. Prints and soda presses, you've got to wait for them to ship it, maybe from Holland or Belgium, which seems to be a lot based.
I mean, the other thing to think about, I would say, around in your space is automation. Like how will automation affect the way that people buy and use physically printed outputs? Like who is really pushing that? Who's really pushing that? What do you need to do to perhaps mitigate against that or take advantage of it? Even as you're talking about conversations, I'm thinking, how could you have a conversation with a client in a way that gathers their unique needs and then gives them something different? That could be very different in the future, for sure.
The problem for us as a very small company is there are things like MIS systems out there where you can automate a lot of what we do. Already we are doing it on a manual basis where someone can log in remotely. If the paper is already loaded, we can print virtually remotely. It just needs someone to be there at the end of it, coming out the other end, and then cutting it and sending it to the person. Obviously, which has to be a manual task. But yeah, there are systems out there, but for us, the problem is the cost to set that up. They're normally quite high. Especially if you're doing these online print solutions, the amount of information and quoting you have to do up front to get that set up is so expensive. And then with things like, obviously, especially at the moment where prices are changing, you'd have to then keep going back maybe on a monthly or bi-monthly scenario to then go and re-input all in prices again as paper costs change, which obviously I know Scandinavia is obviously very big in. 75% of the UK's paper comes from Scandinavia. So, and I think about 2 years ago, we're at a point where paper prices went up 5 times in 1 year.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary. Just going to move on. Final couple of habits. Of, the third one is like tell a human story. So if you're going to think about the future, it often can feel very disarming. So this is a sort of headline you typically see in the news, especially at the moment. There's a lot of horrible things happening out there, which can completely, push people away. So the idea that we try to adopt, certainly at Nile, is about humanizing that future so that you can do something with it. And what do we mean by that? Well, the habit is really about, again, it could be a project you're working on or a particular client you're working with, and you're trying to get them to think differently about what the future could be like. It's about telling that story in the context of that particular project or interaction you're having. This doesn't need to be complicated. Thinking about the remote working example, so I like to think of this as like writing a little kind of card, if you like, that describes this future. So earlier we talked about this idea of a much more transformative remote working future. This idea that people are completely transforming their homes in radical ways to accommodate the way that their life and their work is playing out. So not just cobbling together a shoebox and putting their laptop on it, they're completely customizing things. So I've, imagine a day in the life 2025. Maybe it's about an ambitious entrepreneur. Maybe they run a yoga business, and everything's very local. So they're not traveling into the city. This is happening in their local town. And maybe there's a new type of insurance that they've bought because the way that their business works and interacts with their home life presents a whole set of risks that didn't exist before. And maybe Zoom has diversified into financial services, and this product that that she's bought from Zoom Insurance has been, she hasn't actively gone out and got a quote for it. Maybe she's got, and this is sort of happening already, maybe she's got a finance AI that's done that on her behalf. So this sort of telling this sort of story help. That's quite a lot crammed into like a sentence, I know, but you're trying to create this kind of relatable story and put a person, even just having a picture of an individual that you can imagine occupying this world is a great way to spark debate. The other way that we do that is to create future personas. So this particular one was around the future of work, and this person, Danny, we were talking about how she would use global work platforms to, in the same way that Uber drivers get their work. What if that scaled to all sorts of different skill that you could buy? And maybe there's a way to kind of get, maybe people are scored on their ability and they get work through that platform. So that's just another way to humanize that future so that you can relate to it. Again, there's quite a good tool that can help you with this. This is called ARTEFACT from the Future. There's a link to it in the presentation, which I'll share. And really what it does is it helps you break down, if you are going to think about this future and humanize it, it's useful to have a framework to break it down for you. So this one helps you think about who would inhabit the future, what would it feel like, what would they be doing, what type of, how would you describe that future? So that hyperlocal thing came from here. What object or thing would people be using? So for you, Gary, you could be thinking about the way that people would customize and buy print services in the future. What would they be doing it for? How would they do it? And what would it look and feel like? And I suppose the trick with that stuff is trying to do it in a way that isn't just about feels like it's today or next week. It feels like it's pushing your thinking a bit further. That's the hard part, I guess. But this is a useful way to break it down.
Just to see a copy of that form, Sandra, that might help us to sort of ascertain what we need to do, because we have two markets, obviously our existing client base and obviously new business coming, but also being based in Greenwich, we have a hyper-local business we'd like to try and tap into. It's quite a wealthy area. And we have quite a few people, and it's about at least 1,000 new apartments that have gone up around us in the last 5 years. Where we're thinking tapping into invites, into like moving home, bespoke Christmas cards and stuff like that. It's just getting that out to them and through them, And also with some of our existing long-standing clients, obviously payment or cost structures are different to what you would release to either new business or if you're trying to win business from someone else, and you don't want to scupper your existing modules with new business by displaying everything to everyone.
I think the hyperlocal thing's interesting for you guys for sure, depending on how that plays out and what difference that makes to the what types of business are on your doorstep. Just finally then, just in terms of these habits that we talked about, so remember, scan the horizon, explore different types of future, humanize it in some way, put a person in that story and make it feel like you can relate to it. The final bit is the so what. So what, if you do all of this, or what's the point of all of that? You need to be able to understand the impact of that future on the things that you care about. And I suppose the thing to realize here is that you're not trying to come up with something that has never been thought of before, really. That's not the goal. Often you can take something that perhaps you've seen elsewhere, in fact. So maybe someone else has developed a scenario or talked about the future of food or the future of printing, whatever it might be, and you're just looking to understand what that means for me. And maybe you don't have time for steps 1 to 3 that I've been through. You could take that idea and say, well, what's the impact of that? And what you can start to do is, I won't get into this too much detail, but the idea is basically understanding when you need to make a decision, or a key decision, is to understand what that future could mean for the different aspects of your business. So if you are a sports retailer and you're interested in this future that's about individuals that run their own health business from home, and they've transformed their homes, they're buying this new type of financial service from Zoom, what could that mean? And this is kind of a fairly obvious one, but it just kind of gets the point home. If we're seeing this shift that people are completely changing their physical space and their behaviors at home to make their home and work life work smarter. So it's not just about cobbling things together, it's a complete transformation. There could be a whole range of opportunities in that market for accessorizing, or allow people to have one space that fulfills many needs at one time. You can start to see the impact of thinking about that future on your business, and maybe an opportunity that you could have to take advantage of that. And again, there's a good tool for that. It's called Cross Impact Matrix. It's very simple. On the left-hand side, you put down the things that you're seeing changing, like that idea of people transforming their physical space, and then across the top, the impact zones. They would be things that you care about. So it could be your product offering, your current customers, your competitors, I don't know, your team, your cost base, whatever that might be. And by mashing these things up, you start to see connections that you perhaps otherwise wouldn't have seen. So the takeaway here is, if you are starting to think about how things would change, make sure that you spend some time thinking about the different things in your particular areas of interest that could be affected by that. And this is a very simple way to do it. So just sort of, I realize that there's a lot to take in, and I'm not suggesting that you go away and do all 4 of these things at once. It's very much about starting small. So if nothing else, I would encourage you to start scanning the horizon for these signals of change, trying to perhaps stretch your thinking. If you don't typically spend much time thinking about the political or environmental things that are going on, perhaps seek those things out. Try and involve other people in that process if you can. If you have a team, buddy up with that person and just say, hey, look, I think we should spend a bit more time just thinking through the future and how it could play out for us. I know we've got some pressing things we need to do tomorrow, this week, but let's set some time aside to do that. Except that certainly in the beginning, this is an imperfect process. You're not going to get fully rounded results from day one. But spending some time is better than nothing. And then the final thing, and the hardest part about this, is embracing things that challenge your cherished beliefs. So the way that your business runs today, if you think about this whole pandemic situation, how many of us would have prepared for that? Not many. So you do need to make some space to stretch your thinking and embrace the ridiculous, as I've put there. Yeah, any questions? We don't need to type them into the chat. You can call those out. But I'd be really curious to just see what are people's reflections on the things that I've shown here. Can you see how you might use this in the work that you do?
It certainly made me think, and I certainly will start having a conversation with the colleagues at work. We've always had a general meeting about what we should be doing in the next 3-6 months or something, but we need to sort of really maybe put it more pen to paper to make it more formal.
Yeah. Starting with signals. So saying, what are we seeing? So maybe just spreading your horizon a bit wider. What are we seeing going on at the moment? What's happening in our local area? What's happening? What are people? What are consumer behaviors? What are people buying? What are they consuming? I mean, the other thing to say is, at the minute, there are some really scary things happening in the world that are very hard for us to kind of comprehend and accept, certainly in the States, and some of the environmental stuff, which can have impacts on things like, if you think about the fires in the US at the moment, the impact of real estate and insurance, and global markets and that kind of thing, which seems out there and maybe not part of what you would typically look at as your company, but it's worth just being aware of that stuff, because it could increase the cost of your insurance. It could mean that your customer base changes, or there might be new customers that you hadn't thought of. So I would encourage that as well.
Sorry, Gary, come on.
So I was going to say, generally, I think you're preaching to converting with me anyway. How would you suggest to try and get some of your other team members who are probably less enthusiastic about doing this?
Yeah, I think you need to you've got to find something that they care about and try and tap into that, I think. So if you know what they're and you need some data. I think you need to have some data in the present, this signal stuff.
Right.
You can say, guys, this is happening. This isn't, I've not invented this. Look at what's happening in China. Look at what's happening in, I don't know, whatever the example is. We need to be paying attention to that. And again, automation, it may be challenging to do it, but maybe there are people out there that are doing it, and maybe you need to start thinking about that. So I would try and come at it from a fact-based conversation in the beginning, and look at what's going on right now and saying, look, I think we need to do something about this. I maybe wouldn't start with, I've been dreaming about what 2030 could look like.
No, it's just that obviously the big driver is money, obviously. And also the biggest hurdle is how much have we got to spend to get to this future-proofing scenario. I know it's not one catch fix all, but it's just trying to win them over and say, well, you need to invest X amount of money to be able to sort of stay viable.
I think having things on your radar, that is really important. So there's a list of resources in here. I can maybe send it around afterwards, actually. But there's a lady called Amy Webb. She runs a company called Future Today Institute. If you Google Future Today Institute, they have I think it's about a 400-page trend report, tech trends report, which sounds overwhelming, but it is quite well categorized. And what you would find is in there you'll spot tech trends that you should definitely be aware of around automation and the technology shifts that are happening. You don't have to kind of seek all this stuff out from scratch. A lot of people have done the hard work for you. So
I definitely agree. That's already happening in the print industry, where we're more digital printing rather than the traditional LIFO. Obviously, the machines are connectable. You used to have one machine, one guy operating, and now you have one guy pretty much running 15, 20 machines in the bigger printers. He's just running around, changing the paper, picking up the job and getting them to cut, rather than actually being on the press, getting colour correct, etc. So that automation is already happening in our trade. I don't think we're big enough to need that in our trade, in our company, but I definitely think the online solutions we need to start really seriously looking at because of the remote working aspect and the sales.
Any other comments or questions from the rest of the group today?
I actually have an example of predicting the future horribly wrong. It's a Norwegian company. I don't want to mention who it is, but it used to be one of the big paper and pulp factories in Norway. They, in the beginning, on the digitalization and the internet came, they predicted that the global consumption of newspaper would go, or paper in general, would go down. So they closed down a lot of factory, and they put extra resources into factories making newspaper paper. But it went the other way, didn't it? So it's the demand for luxury paper went up and printed stuff, but for the newspaper it went down. So they almost went bankrupt because of predicting the future wrong.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. How long did it take for that to play out? Was it a sudden thing or?
No, it was over years.
Yeah. Again, I think that.
So obviously, what's really I've seen that there's been a massive shift in the paper industry of magazine grades from Scandinavia being with whole sites being converted from producing nice magazine grades to packaging. obviously amount of home deliveries now and stuff like that. So everyone's going down a cardboard route, packaging route, that kind of graded paper rather than nice quality magazine grades.
Yeah, I think certainty about the future is dangerous. That's maybe the thing I would say. So, you know, be ready to change your direction. It doesn't mean to say you shouldn't explore the future, but I think being certain about a long-term future at the moment is very key, I would say.
I think that example about the paper company there going buying into newsprint, that's actually, I'm surprised that happens because newsprint's been going down for many years, as have hard copy magazines. About in the last 10 to 15 years, readerships of magazines have gone down by about 50% in the last 10 to 15 years, because obviously as more content becomes available online, and obviously these newspapers like The Guardian have been more successful, the Independent, put paywalls up at times, and you subscribe online. You know, they're actually, the cost of actually producing their content is very small to the actual cost of producing hard copy newspaper. So they're actually making more money by putting up a paywall and charging you £1 a copy or 10p a copy, whatever it is, you know, a percentage of what you would have done if it was a hard copy. But yeah, the whole newsprint thing, that's been going downhill for years. But yeah, for us, exactly, it's finding new markets. You know, we used to do lots of brochures and magazines. Today, shut down, even like examples recently, like Q magazine, where that stopped production. You know, so that's now online only, I think, or being sold off by Bauer Media. But yeah, we need to find new avenues, and I think a part of what we do is we need to get that hyper local. You know, so we'll see.
Well, thank you guys. It's 11:05. It was a nice discussion. Neil, it was a great presentation. I really enjoyed it, and thank you as well for setting this up and organizing on behalf of Nile. So it was great. Neil, the presentation will be distributed or available.
Yes. Yeah, that's fine. And yeah, if people have questions afterwards, then feel free to get in touch. My details will be on the presentation as well. So I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Yeah. Okay, any other things? Well, I wish all of you a great day then. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.